Hello. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. We will be covering Is Your SaaS Secure with a deeper focus from Palo Alto Networks on securely enabling SaaS adoption. I'm your host, Chris Truelove, in Partner Marketing with Optiv. Before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have a question during the webinar, please refer to the Q&A window located on the left-hand side of your screen. If for some reason you don't see it there, you can also pull it up from the ribbon at the bottom of your screen where the Q&A icon is. All your questions will be addressed by our speakers at the end of the presentations. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. We are honored to be joined today by experts from both Optiv and our valued strategic partner, Palo Alto Networks. First, Nick Mendez is a cloud security specialist at Optiv. He brings over 13 years of cloud services and leadership experience to the company. Over his career, Mendez has established himself as a trusted advisor in the PCI and HIPAA high trust space, as well as among Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies. As a cloud security specialist, Nick focuses on providing strategic conversation around successful cloud security programs to Optiv's clients. Our second speaker will be Moinal Khan. Moinal is a Director of Product Management at Palo Alto Networks, managing CASB and mobility products. Moinal has been building expertise in service provider security for over 15 years. Prior to Palo Alto Networks, he has held multiple product management roles at Netskope, Juniper, and several other companies. To get things started today, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Nick Mendez, to provide Optiv's perspective and approach to cloud security. Nick?
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us this morning, this afternoon, depending where you are. We greatly appreciate your time. So this morning I'll be going over a little bit around what Optiv is seeing out in the industry, what our customers are asking of us, and really how we're helping them when we're looking at securing the overall SaaS market here. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So let's start off by framing the conversation with some relevant cloud information from the cloud practice, and this will give you a sense of what we're seeing and what we're doing within some of our customer conversations. So as we look at some of the cloud adoption trends, right, there's a continual rise for this, and if you look at this breakdown here, right, there's no surprise here that organizations are highly adopting the cloud still, but more importantly, right, they're looking at adopting the cloud not only from a singular focus but also from a hybrid solution. So as we think about cloud, right, it's not just infrastructure as a service, it's also the SaaS applications and even the platform as a service, as well as integrating some on-prem private cloud solutions that they may have. So as you look at that, right, there's going to be some organizations that are still trying and they're struggling with trying to figure out what is the right workload for us to dip our toe in for the first time into the cloud, right? So we really see a lot of organizations that are have highly secure data that are really struggling to get to the cloud, but they're also looking for ways to get there. And so some of what we'll talk about today are some of the misconceptions about cloud being either more or less secure than their current on-prem solution that they have, and how organizations are overcoming some of these fears here. So as we look at the CASB deployment trends, so what we're seeing here is that yet despite the growth of SaaS applications that are, there's over 22,000 enterprise apps that are out there in today's marketplace, and that's growing today. So there's a huge growth of that there. But what we see is that we've only have around a 7% take rate on customers that have actually deployed CASB to help them have visibility into the SaaS application market, right? And if you look at where customers are going, we're seeing an uptick of about 24% of organizations that are saying either we are looking to deploy a solution around visibility into our SaaS applications, or they are planning to do so by year's end. If we were to rewind this conversation, not even maybe this time last year, we're looking at single-digit percentage points that organizations are really trying to have a program around this. I would venture to say going into 2018, you're going to see another significant increase here to where you're going to see, probably about 40 or 50% of the organizations that have either deployed or they're planning to deploy or will deploy a CASB solution in 2018. And the reason being is that is trying to make sense of all of the applications that are being spun up that they can either see or can't see that organizations are currently using. And so as we look at everything, right, I'll preface this slide with there's always the good and the bad and the ugly of everything within the cloud, right? And so speaking upon this slide here, there is going to be some bad exposures of cloud, and we'll go over that here. And the one that really jumps out to me being on this side of the fence is that there has been an increase of just over 18% of cloud-based threats that are happening year over year, right? So this becomes a traditional trend of that as technology gets more and more advanced, right? There's more and more people out there that are trying to see how they can infiltrate these technologies and really do quite a bit of harm. So if you think about it, right, the average enterprise organization is going to experience about one cloud threat almost daily, right? And so how do you really look at this and what's leading to how organizations are really able to fight this off? The biggest one is that traditional tools that you may have that you've worked with, over the last 5 years or 4 years, they're having some limited functionality or they simply do not work as you extend those into the public cloud. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations struggle with saying, I really want to use and harness the power and the capabilities and the adaptability of what the cloud does, but we're just very fearful that some of the tools that we're using that on our on-prem isn't necessarily going to equate to success as we look at extending those into the public cloud. And Gartner actually has a pretty aggressive target out right now that, they're saying that 95% of all security failures within the public cloud are going to be on the customer side of the house, and that's going to happen through 2020. And so we'll go through a couple of points here of how we can help and how you can really look at making sure that, you're on that 5% and not the 95%, and that's going to be through a shared responsibility model. And then 2, walking through some of the tools that are out there that are helping organizations really look at SaaS and help them guide them through this gamut here. So the biggest item that we're seeing is when you look at the cloud security and you're looking at what customers are having some heartburn around, when you look at this from the security concerns perspective, it's really clear that the fears that they have aren't lining up with some of the capabilities of the tools that are out there today. And so as we speak with our customers, these line up with what the Spotlight report shows. The majority of our customers are having some heartburn around, how do they look at data leakage? What about regulatory and compliance? But more importantly, what about data privacy and confidentiality? Right? Those are going to be the biggest points that our customers are constantly asking us about. And how do they really look at harnessing the power of the cloud, but also be able to have the ability to go ahead and to secure these items here? So as we look at the shared responsibility model, which I discussed a couple of slides previous, this is going to be extremely important to understand here, right? And this goes along with Gartner mentioning that 95% of data breaches are going to land on the customer side of the house. And so for this conversation, if we zoom into the SaaS model and the SaaS cloud adoption continues to grow because they represent the greatest cost versus the benefit with the fastest implementation time. So if we take the top 2 boxes here, the people in the data box, these are going to be the responsibility of the customer, and they're really going to represent the majority of the risk with SaaS. And so the complexity of these 2 areas is going to vary from extremely mild to extremely complex. So if you really look at a SaaS application like Salesforce or O365, they have thousands upon thousands of ways that you can configure different options and the way that you integrate them, right? And all of them are going to be unique to each application, and they're all going to have different ways in which you're able to deploy these. And so when you look at it, the people responsibility is really going to be a domain within the identity and access management. So it ultimately begs for a comprehensive strategy around identity and access management. And while the data responsibility covers a really huge portion, huge cross-section of domains, if you look at it from data and access governance to malware all the way to privacy, the configurations for each one of these is going to be extremely unique to the provider that you choose, and depending on what you're trying to do can ultimately become a full-time job of how do you secure these. So the cloud provider responsibility in blue are areas that traditional on-prem solutions can control. So if you look at it from including like logging, endpoint protection, network security, so on and so forth, this can be fed into solutions that would traditionally aid in a disaster recovery and incident response. But if you look at how do you get those logs from the providers, right? And that's going to be where customers are having the heartburn of saying, so how do I do incident response in the cloud, right? And this is where CASB solutions come into play. While they're not a substitution or a cure-all for a comprehensive overall cloud strategy, they are a tool that will help unify policies, visibility, data loss, data classification across all clouds, right? So whether you're doing a public multi-cloud solution or a private cloud solution or all of the above, right? The CASB market will help you make sense of it all. And so as we look at CASB, right, a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out, what exactly is it? How is it going to help me? And more importantly, how is it going to help us along the digital transformation journey that we have as an organization? So very simply put, CASB is going to be a software tool that really sits in between your on-prem infrastructure and the cloud provider that you choose, right? So if we look at your private data center, and let's just take, for example, you're picking Azure, this software is going to sit in between the two infrastructures, right? And what it does is it's ultimately going to be a traffic cop for you to understand, allowing an organization to be able to say, okay, my security policies look like X for an on-prem or within my network, but as the extension moves into the public cloud, to where organizations may need to use Workday or Salesforce, any of the SaaS applications, right? Being able to say, here is what our network policies from a security standpoint look like, who can get this information, who can transfer this information, and it extends that and it gives them the ability to have a safe vault, if you will, of being able to connect to these SaaS offerings and still have the same protection, if you will, as if you were on your own network, right? And so if you really look at it, being able to extend that security reach is going to be huge. And this is where a lot of organizations will have a lot of heartburn, right, is saying that they ultimately want to put some really delicate workloads in the cloud simply because they're either A, there's an initiative to move X amount of workloads into the public cloud, or B, they're just running out of space within their current data center and they're looking to alleviate some of that pressure that they have. But really having the ability to understand the security policies are going to be beyond your own infrastructure and how it can help protect into the public cloud. So if we look at our approach, Optiv's approach, right, it's really going to be a business-aligned strategy. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what we do is create a security program that enables your organization by understanding what is ultimately the business objective. I can't tell you enough how many times I've been brought into a conversation to where an organization will say, I have this project and I had this tool in mind. But if we really ask them to pause for just a moment and tell us, ultimately what are the business objectives you're trying to accomplish, not only for this project, but what are some of the other projects that the overall business, the overall company has, and let's see if we can align these and really give you a lot of lift, if you will, by saying, That's not only be able to create a security program and secure your SaaS applications for this venture, but also future ventures to come. Really, and if we look at that from that business objective, we also uncover, what are some of the compliance objectives that you have, what are some of the material risks that you're undertaking, and what are some of the threats that you have. And so this is how we really understand what's the right technology for you. And it could be, across all of these different SaaS applications, right? It could be, O365 is the right one for you. It could be, Workday is the correct one for you, so on and so forth, right? So really, as you look at that, is understanding, look at the forest from the trees, if you will, and being able to say, I understand that there's a project here, but what's the greater good, right? What are we trying to solve for? And being able to use the right use case for the technology to be able to get you where you want to go, not only for the short-term tactical goals, but also for the more important long-term strategy goals that the organization has. And so this is where really Optiv, how Optiv can help. So if you look at the diagram on the right, it's a circular diagram, and it has cloud security right in the middle. The first thing that I'd like to point out here is that we don't necessarily have to start at the north end where it says SaaS Cloud Security Architecture Program. Depending where an organization is in their journey, we may come in and asked to help them integrate some of the tools that they've chosen. They could be asking us to help them implement a certain solution that they've already purchased, or they could say, you know what, I need some help with a program governance model, right? How can you help us write this policies into place? And so when we look at that, the focus that Optiv has at the end of the day is to really create a program that can be used cross-functional across all different business units within the organization. So our focus is going to be on developing agility and security around an application-centric model and align that cloud security strategy with the business drivers and the risk tolerances that you have that will then be able to encompass this circular diagram here on the right. And so where organizations really like what we have to offer is that when we come in and help, we don't offer them just a run book of 150 pages and says, here's all the things that you're having trouble with. Good luck to you. Optiv really takes it a step further to where we can actually come in and help design and engineer. We can help you implement those designs. We can actually help, in some cases, manage certain tools for you or co-manage some of the tools for you. And we can also design kind of what that architecture should look like as you're using the SaaS model and how it's going to integrate into different segments, like I had mentioned earlier, identity and access management, third-party risk, governance models, so on and so forth. And so really what we do is we really bring to the table years and years of experience of understanding that, cloud encompasses more than just one item, right? It encompasses a lot. And so for us to be able to come in and create something from beginning to end or, from the middle to the end is really helpful for organizations that they really have a partner sitting riding shotgun with them that will help them not only deploy this but also implement it and manage it moving forward should that be the use case. And so as we look at the CASB piece, and a lot of organizations will ask you, how do you guys work with CASB? Help us understand a little bit more really how Optiv can help. And when we look at the CASB as we're implementing it, we really use an evaluation framework, and it's based upon 4 keys of functionality, which is going to be around visibility, compliance, threat protection, and data security. And so during this evaluation framework, right, we really look at taking it a step further and understanding it all the way from something as simple as an API integration all the way down to, how is the encryption model taken care of? How are we going to be able to proactively look at the security analytics behind each individual user? And then being able to give them a user interface that they can actually use and get some data, right? A lot of organizations will say, hey, we'll create this outstanding data market for you, and you'll have an interface to be able to look at it. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of noise that people are seeing. There's a ton of data, but what's the relevant data to them, right? And as we look at at this, right, we start going into the policy and the enforcement of each one of the roles that an individual has, be able to give you the data that you need versus just a ton of data that you have to sift through. So at the end of the day, we can help write that interface to help understand what exactly is it that you need to be seeing that will come to the forefront for you. And so why Optiv for cloud security? Here's one of the items that I think that Optiv really extends himself on to help organizations. First, we are complete focused around a solution offering from strategy to implementation to management. So for us as the cloud security team, right, we don't look at it as, what is something that you want to purchase and then we'll retrofit it in from there. What we really do is take a full service offering approach of understanding short-term tactical goals, long-term strategic goals, and how do you implement those across the landscape, right? And more importantly, what are deliverable, intermittent deliverable steps that we can accomplish along the way in order to get you a repeatable approach that at the end of the day, this is going to be tailored to you and to you only. But at the end of the day, right, how can this be scalable and repeatable through your organization as your business changes? And so one of the items that we do a really good job on is that, organizations will say, we have a cloud security expert. But when we really look at cloud security, as I had mentioned in a couple of slides previous, is that cloud can also introduce identity and access management. It can introduce third-party risk, governance, compliance. And each one of our centers of excellence that we have within Optiv has that understanding of cloud, right? And so we, as a cloud organization, we ride shotgun with each one of these circles of excellence, right? And so we bring the decades of experience of different parts of our organization to help create that turnkey solution around cloud security, right? So whether it's an identity piece in the cloud that you need help with, whether it is looking at tools, we have subject matter expert around different tools that we have. We have the ability to call back to each one of those circles of excellence. The next item is that we have what we call Office of the CISO here. And so Optiv has around 40 to 50 CISOs ex-CISOs, that now work for Optiv. And many times when we have these executive level conversations, the organization and the security executive will ask, who can I speak with at Optiv that has had some of the same problems that I'm going through now? And so the beautiful thing about that is that we can bring in peer-to-peer conversations around what were some of the items that he or she faced while they had the seat of a CISO, right? How did they overcome some of the challenges that they had with moving some serious workloads into the public cloud? And so we can have those conversations from a peer-to-peer perspective. And really, we have a lot of conversations that open up there, right? And so when we look at our ability to be able to help organizations, we have over 12,000 client experiences. We have over 1,000 security experts on staff here at Optiv. And we have a research team that is constantly looking at, what's the next initiatives that are out there for cybersecurity pertaining to the cloud. And then we wrap that all up, and we have our Optiv University that we really teach each one of our individuals, employees here at Optiv of, how they need to get trained up for the next initiatives that are out there. How do they look at, the CASB market? How do they look at different markets that are coming up that we really need to understand and be able to execute on? So that ends my portion of the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer those, and we're happy to follow up with each individual one of you here. So I'm going to hand it over to Moinal for his portion of the presentation. Moinal, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. So again, my name is Moinul Khan, Director of Product Management from Palo Alto Networks. What I will be covering is Nick has done a fantastic job talking about the CASB landscape, what are the vendors out there, and what problems they're trying to solve. In my presentation, in my section, I will be focusing on how we are what approach we are taking to secure SaaS adoption. So before I talk about the solution, let's first talk about the problems, right? And as Nick mentioned, the SaaS application, the SaaS adoption, it's exploding. And because of the explosion of SaaS adoption, what are the problems that organizations are dealing with, right? Number one, malware propagation. And what I mean by that is a hacker in the past used to attack your network, and hacker is trying to get to your endpoint. Now, as organizations are adopting thousands of SaaS applications, that is becoming the new entry point. And what that means is if someone is able to hack to your SaaS application, and especially corporate sanctioned SaaS application, they can inject an exe, they can inject a PDF or Office document that happens to be running macros. And once that one single asset makes it to one of your endpoint, then from that endpoint, that malware, that threat will propagate throughout the organization. So this is a very common problem nowadays we are seeing as we are working with 40, 50,000 of our customers. The second problem, which is actually most common, is data loss and data exfiltration. As we are working with our customers, we actually see terabytes of data publicly exposed from their corporate sanctioned application. It could be Box, it could be Office 365, Google Apps, even their applitions like AWS S3 bucket and stuff like that. We have seen millions of files being shared with personal Gmail account or Hotmail account or Yahoo account. So those are more like nefarious use cases where your employee is trying to share company sensitive documents with their personal Gmail account so that they can access these documents even when they leave the company. The other common problem that we see is there are applications like Google, applications like Office 365 in their marketplace. They are allowing small companies or even developers to publish applications, and a lot of these applications are malicious. And what's actually happening is these malicious applications are now connecting to your corporate instance of Office 365, Google Apps, and other applications, right? So those are some of the examples. These are happening now. I want to give you a couple of specific examples, and you might have seen it in the news. Just a couple of months ago, an organization was using AWS. They're heavy AWS users. They have application stack that they're hosting from the public cloud. And of course, their AWS deployment has S3 bucket. And because of the simple mistake, a simple configuration mistake, millions of sensitive assets, millions of U.S. voter information were publicly exposed. So a user, again, it's not really intentional. The end user, they don't know how to use this application. They just exposed a folder which happens to be very sensitive folder with a public URL. We have seen attacks, on Google Apps, phishing attacks. So a malicious app developer, he published an application in the marketplace with exactly the Google Drive logo. And as individual users are using Gmail application, that app popped up and said, "Can I access to your email and contact list?" And the end user, being naive, said yes. That malicious app then connected to the corporate Gmail account, and did a phishing attack, stole the credentials, and then laterally moved. Right. So those are some of the examples. Again, some of the recent incidents that we have seen. Now, how organizations are now dealing with these problems, right? So first of all, as we speak to thousands of enterprise organizations and we look at their SaaS adoption, there are three different types of SaaS applications we see. The first one is unsanctioned application, also known as shadow IT. And what that means is individual users are shepherding different SaaS applications into the organization. So, I have a personal Gmail account, I use it. I have an iCloud account, I use it, right? That type of stuff. We also see a lot of departmental apps. They're also corporate unsanctioned because IT never approved them. IT never, knew that a department or a group is using so on and so applications. So these are all your shadow IT. These are all your unsanctioned applications. The second bucket, which is very common, is tolerated apps. And what I mean by tolerated apps is, at Palo Alto Networks, our file sharing application is Office 365. But oftentimes we work with our business partners, and one of our auditors, their version, their corporate sanctioned file sharing application is Google. So I have to tolerate that application, right? So it is not corporate sanctioned. However, I know that my finance users are on a daily basis is working with my auditor. So I need to tolerate that application. The question is, how do I tolerate this application? What kind of granular controls I have in place so that I can control the behavior is something that organizations are dealing with. And then the last bucket, more common bucket, is your corporate sanctions SaaS application. These are the applications that IT is embracing, and they are directly responsible for this sanctioned application and therefore looking for much deeper security controls, right? Now, as we look at the industry, what is the approach that different vendors are taking to solve these problems, right? And Nick talked about CASB. Yes, CASB stands for Cloud Access Security Brokers, and there are a bunch of vendors are in that space. The pure play CASB vendors, typically the approach that they're talking about is an overlay cloud, proxy approach. And what that means is you need to have a subscription in their cloud-based proxy. And once you have that subscription, your traffic, your on-prem traffic and off-prem traffic is going through that proxy before it's going into the SaaS application. And as the traffic going into their cloud proxy, they have capabilities to apply different policies, okay? Now, when Palo Alto looks at that approach, we think that approach is very complex approach. And what I mean by that is, deploying a cloud proxy might be very simple because the vendor is going to create a tenant instance and you have access to that cloud proxy. However, the traffic forwarding to that cloud proxy could be very, very complex. The first step, what you do is the pure play CASB vendors will tell you to share your Palo Alto firewall logs or your proxy logs so that they can give you that shadow IT visibility, which seems to be the very first step to secure SaaS applications. You need to know how many applications are running, what kind of applications are running, what risk they're introducing, which users are using these applications. So in order for them to give you that visibility, they're going to ask you to share logs. And then the first thing for you to do is you need to deploy a log forwarder here, which will parse through the firewall logs and then start publishing this metadata to their cloud proxy so that when you log into the cloud proxy, you have that visibility, okay? The next step is, now that you have that visibility, you want to control this traffic. So how do you then steer that traffic from your on-prem users to their cloud proxy? So they will ask you to deploy some type of traffic forwarder on-prem, and that kind of like adds to the complexity. A lot of organizations then want to create policy based on different OUs, different user groups, different user identity and stuff like that. So you probably need an AD connector that will then plug into your LDAP and fetch user group information, and then you can then start deploying these policies, right? If you are already using an on-prem proxy, there is a question of pack file merge. And what that means is your on-prem proxy is already taking your all HTTP, HTTPS traffic. Now you have to divide the SaaS traffic going into this newly introduced cloud proxy versus your on-prem proxy. So again, adding complexity. And if you have remote users, then you need to steer the traffic from the endpoint to their cloud proxy. So you probably need a new VPN agent, a new VPN client, or you probably need to introduce a new pack file. You have to deploy it to thousands of machines you have. All of that we consider to be very complex if you then think about this overlay proxy on top of what you have. So the question is, how can you not use this, overlay proxy, but achieve the similar things or secure your SaaS application? At least for 40, 50,000 customers of ours, Palo Alto customers, we are already at the perimeter edge. And what that means is all your SaaS traffic, all your web traffic is egressing out of our firewall. And what that means is if our firewall is doing its job, then it's seeing all the traffic, and it will give you the visibility, and it will give you a lot of these granular controls that you need to secure your unsanctioned and tolerated apps. So all the on-prem traffic is going through the firewall. If you have remote users, we have Global Protect on endpoint, and Global Protect will be able to steer the traffic either to your on-prem firewall or the firewall that is deployed in the cloud. So we offer our VM series in public cloud like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. On top of it, you can actually, if you want, you do not have to buy firewall and deploy it yourself. You can just buy the whole thing as a service, right? So in one way or the other, our gateway is seeing the traffic, and our gateway is giving you complete visibility of your shadow IT. It will give you a lot of control mechanism to secure this SaaS application. The only additional piece that you are going to need from Palo Alto Networks is our Aperture, which is a cloud-based service that we run from the cloud. And this is an API approach, and what that means is we use application API to connect to your sanctioned SaaS applications, and we give you a lot more deeper security controls that you need to secure these sanctioned SaaS applications, right? So now, a little bit more solution details. This is a slide that I use that Palo Alto Networks used 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when we shipped our first next-generation firewall, Gartner said, you are a next-gen firewall because you are not just looking at port and protocol. You are looking at user identity, and you are looking at application ID. You know exactly which user is using what application and what exactly they're doing within this application, makes you a next-generation firewall. And that is the fundamental capability that you need when you think about SaaS security, okay? And if you actually kind of like deep dive onto this slide, what I just said, a traditional firewall 10 years ago, again, was looking at source IP, dest IP, and TCP and SSL. When we released our next generation firewall, let me build this entire slide first, and it will make a lot more sense. As traffic is going through our gateway, we are not only looking at source IP and dest IP and SSL and TCP. We will tell you that Mike Jacobson from product management is using a file sharing application that is hosted in Canada, and the name of the file sharing application is called SlideShare. And then the user is uploading a PowerPoint document, and in that PowerPoint document, we see a string called confidential and proprietary. And this is something that we have been doing for the last 10 years, and that makes us next generation firewall with all the visibility that you need to secure your SaaS application. So what that means is every single packet, every single traffic, it could be your web traffic, it could be your SaaS traffic, as it is traversing through our firewall, we will give you this type of visibility. Once you have this type of visibility, you can use any of this attribute to control the user behavior. So if you don't want product management to start uploading SlideShare that has confidential and proprietary into an corporate unsanctioned application called SlideShare, you can simply block that, right? If you do not want anybody to use personal version of their box application when they are in the network, then you can block that. If you want to allow upload to Google Drive, or block upload to Google Drive because it's your corporate unsanctioned application, but you are treating it as a tolerated apps, then you can do so. So it's not only that we can look at application, but we can look at specific functions within that application, what people are doing, right? So again, as traffic is going through our firewall, these are the native capabilities that we have built in our gateway that gives you complete visibility of your SaaS usage. And then we have application ID, we have user ID, we have function control, we have file blocking profile. All of that can be utilized to secure your unsanctioned application and tolerated apps. Now, for sanctioned SaaS application, you probably need a little bit more because as an IT, you have more responsibility on your corporate sanctioned SaaS applications because these are the ones that you yourself introduce to the organizations, and you have to make sure those applications are absolutely 100% secure at all times, right? And for that, what we do is our Aperture, which is a cloud-based service, it connects to your sanctioned application via API. So this sanctioned application could be Box, Office 365, Salesforce, GitHub. It could be even public applications like AWS S3, AWS Console, and so on and so forth. And once we make that connection, there are different type of services that we provide from Aperture. So the first one I like to talk about is malware propagation, right? So Aperture is fully integrated with our WildFire, which is our threat intelligence cloud. This is one of the largest sandbox in the world. More than 15,000 customers are using that sandbox. And through that WildFire integration, we can protect you from both known and unknown threats. And what that means is when we connect to your Box account, we have access to all your folders and files and assets. And what we will do is we will scan through that content and we will talk to WildFire and we will try to figure out if any of that existing content is malicious content. If that is the case, then Aperture will take quarantine action. If we see an unknown exe sitting there, we can send that entire file to WildFire in the cloud. WildFire will sandbox it, and within few minutes we will get the verdict. Based on the verdict, we will take quarantine action, right? So again, you have full malware prevention solution for your corporate sanction application when you subscribe to Aperture. The next thing I would like to talk about is data loss prevention, right? So Aperture is a full, very comprehensive DLP engine, and what we do is we let you create DLP policies. So you can define what data is sensitive for your organization. Is it a simple regex that says my company confidential in a header and footer of the document, or is it industry standard classifiers that you are interested? Like you are a retail company and you want to protect your customers' credit card information, you can create that policy in Aperture. You can say, the PCI data is very important, so I like to know which document has customer credit card information. You can do it for any PII data as well. It could be social security number, it could be driving license number, and so on and so forth. The same thing is applicable for healthcare agencies that are looking for PHI type of data or different compliance-related data that they want to protect. For high-tech companies, you can write a policy for source code detection and so on and so forth. Now, once you create this policy, what Aperture does is, as it is scanning through your content in the cloud, it will first locate which assets are sensitive. And once we locate that this is a PII file or this is a file with a lot of PCI information, then we look at the exposure. And what I mean by that is, if Moinul has uploaded some sensitive document in his corporate Box account, and as long as these documents are private, then that behavior might be okay because, well, this is Moinul's corporate Box account, and it's a cloud storage application and file sharing application. So as an organization, we should be able to allow that. However, if after uploading that sensitive asset, if Moinul was sharing that document with a public URL, or Moinul was sharing that document with an external collaborator, a user that is outside of my domain, that behavior might be risky. So Aperture will then tag this behavior as a risky behavior. It will bubble it up on the interface, and it will let you remediate those risks, right? So that's what we do as part of DLP. Now, also, we have machine learning capabilities as part of our DLP solution. And what that does is, oftentimes we run into organizations who do not have DLP experts. So these are the IT folks, who haven't dealt with any DLP products in the past. They don't know what is sensitive for their organization. They are not capable of writing a complex regular expressions or try to create DLP policy. For that type of organizations, we ourselves provide that capability natively through machine learning. And what that means is, over the last several years, Aperture has learned from thousands and thousands of documents and different data sources. And with that learning, when Aperture connect to your corporate Office 365 account, Aperture will be automatically detect your sensitive financial documents, your legal documents, your healthcare documents. You do not have to write a single policy for that. Aperture will be able to automatically say that this is a sensitive NDA that has been shared with an external collaborator, or this is a merger and acquisition documents, user mistakenly sharing it from a folder, and that folder is publicly exposed. Okay, so we do all of that through machine learning capabilities. The other services that we offer through Aperture is user anomalies. And what that means is a sales employee is leaving the organization, and all of a sudden in the last 2 weeks, he's downloading thousands of Salesforce reports that contain your pipeline information, customer contact information, and so on and so forth. Aperture will tag that behavior as an anomaly because typically the user doesn't do that amount of download from Salesforce or from Box or from Office 365. And then we can also do control third-party apps that are connected to this app ecosystem or marketplace. So as an administrator, you can say none of these applications in the Google Marketplace is allowed to connect to my corporate Google account. So the attack that I talked about at the earlier part of my presentation, those are the things that Aperture can prevent, right? Now, once we do all of that, from detection perspective, Aperture is prevention-focused product. So all the risk that we generate, you can further investigate manually, you can take manual action, but at the same time, you can take automated action. So a simple example would be Aperture, if you find any sensitive document that is publicly available, please remove that public URL, right? So we will immediately do it. If you find a malware, please quarantine that malware. Those are the things that Aperture, you can write a policy through automated actions, and Aperture will take automated actions. These are the applications. Right now we are supporting through Aperture, so we support about 20 applications, mostly common used applications. So that's Aperture. Through Next Generation Firewall, we have deep application ID and function control, the different connectors that we have built for about 2,500 applications. In addition to that, our gateway supports millions of URL signatures. So a simple example would be you just want to block an application called Prezi because Prezi is a risky application. You can simply use our URL signature for that. But if you need more granular control, like you want to allow download but block upload, or you want to block sharing or editing or post, things like that, then we have our application ID. Aperture is globally available. We have data centers in US, we have data centers in EMEA and APAC. And that kind of like brings me to my last slide is our comprehensive platform approach where we are securing your SaaS applications through on-prem gateway. We have endpoint security products, Traps. We have Global Protect that steers the traffic and secures that traffic. And then you have Aperture that is connecting from the cloud directly to your SaaS applications and protecting these applications. So with that, I am done with my part. We can now go into Q&A. Chris?
Yes, excellent job, Nick and Mainal. Great job explaining Optiv's capabilities as it pertains to cloud and the SaaS application story with Palo Alto Networks. Just very valuable information. Thank you guys. Well done. As Mainal said, now let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in. As a reminder, you can ask questions on the left-hand side of your screen in the Q&A window. If you can't find it there, then there's a ribbon at the bottom. You can pull it up. We do have a few questions, and I will go ahead and start with them now. Mainal, I'll start with you. This question looks like it pertains to you. What is the difference between existing DLP and your CASB solution?
Okay, great question. The existing DLP solution, Symantec, Vontu, or McAfee and stuff like that, on-prem DLP, the way I would differentiate between our DLP and on-prem, the traditional DLP, the traditional DLP that are sitting on-prem are more like a sledgehammer. And what that means is, as the traffic is going through these DLP solutions, the DLP solutions will identify what kind of data it is. Is it PCI? Is it PII? The actions that traditional DLP takes, are yes or no. And what that means is, hey, I want to protect my custodial data. Once again, I am in retail business. I need to make sure that my customer's credit card information is secure. So the on-prem DLP is perfect for protecting this custodial data. And what that will say is, any file that is going with the PCI data is not allowed to go out. Okay, so again, it's a sledgehammer, yes or no. Our DLP is very different. Our DLP solution through Aperture, what it does is, see, you deploy this box application for your users, and you want your users to use this application. You are enabling them to use this application. So sensitive data can go to the SaaS applications. But what we look at is if that sensitive data has been exposed. So it's not about just looking at the content, but if the content is being shared with public URL intentionally or unintentionally, if that sensitive content has been shared with untrusted users, those are the things that we focus on, and those are the things that we prevent.
Okay? Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question. Here's one. Nick, for you. Nick, can you give me an example of how an enterprise is successfully securing their applications?
Yeah. So the first step that they've, for that example, is organizations have really looked at understanding what applications they have running on their network that are sanctioned versus unsanctioned. So I'll give you a perfect example. We were speaking with an organization that we had the conversation around how many applications they had running, SaaS applications they had running, and they had mentioned that they should be somewhere in the neighborhood between 95 and about 100. And so when we went and we helped them through the model of understanding what they had running, they actually had 2x running. So they had close to 200 applications that were running. Out of those, half of those were unsanctioned, that were outside the purview of security. And so the first thing to do as you start really trying to figure out, that model there is, discover the unknowns. Try to figure out what do you know and what can you see, but more importantly, seek to understand what you don't know and really create a model of how do you lasso what you don't know into the model to where it would be sanctioned that you now have visibility. It does a couple of things when you do that. One, it can help you save money because you may be spending money on two tools that the company can actually migrate over into a singular tool. And two, you can actually help with visibility because if most organization is using a tool because it may be easier to use or what have you, and you have some pretty sensitive data, right, you have the ability now to really move to a platform that your company is going to really adhere to, and so that'll help you kind of move things into that sanctioned world. So I'd say that's the biggest thing you can do around that.
Thank you, Nick. Here's another question here. Moinal, back to you. Well, what is the biggest trend you are seeing regarding CASB adoption when you talk to your existing paying customers?
I'm glad that this question is an excellent question. So I'm going to talk about two. As we talk to our existing Palo Alto customers, the very first trend that we are seeing is that organizations, they want to avoid the complexity through an overlay technology. And I will tell you why. In the past, again, I'm going to take you back 10 years. In the past, due to limited functionalities available in the firewall, enterprises, they gave up on expecting their firewalls to actually secure any traffic going in and out of their environment, right? And as a result, they deployed many firewall helper products, such as proxies, IPS, network AV, app control gateways, etc. This mindset change with the advent of the next generation firewall 10 years ago, right? But then now, interestingly, what's happening is with the introduction of the SaaS applications, this trend appears to be cropping up again because many next generation firewall are not equipped to effectively perform this inline CASB functionality, right? So a lot of these organizations are thinking that, oh, we probably need an overlay proxy approach to secure these SaaS applications. But then when what they really want is to avoid that complexity that they have once gone through 10 years ago by, bolting up boxes after boxes after boxes, right? So that's a very common trend. That's a very true expectations that we see within our existing install base. And then the second thing that is very predominant when we talk to our existing customer is that it's crazy if you think that organizations are only trying to secure SaaS applications, right? See, if the data exfiltration is a concern for your SaaS application, why wouldn't that be concern if you have an on-prem FTP server, okay? So when they look at the solutions, they're very aware of that situation is that, look, I do not only want to secure my SaaS applications, but at the same time, I need a solution that also secure my non-SaaS applications. Once again, if the malware propagation is a concern, it's not only concerned on the SaaS application, but you need to have a platform approach where you can prevent a malware coming into the network, coming onto your endpoint, and coming onto the cloud application. So I would say those are the two things. Those are the most, two common trends that we are seeing within existing Palo Alto install base.
Thank you very much. It looks like we have time for one more question. And Nick, this one is appropriately for you. Nick, how can I make sure that I have visibility into all applications, sanctioned and unsanctioned, and that I'm applying the appropriate security controls?
I think the first thing would be is to really work with someone that you can have almost like an assessment, if you will, that you can work towards that visibility model. So the first thing is to really understand, other than visibility into the SaaS application, really look at it from a compliance perspective and look at it from more of a larger project than just, hey, how can I have visibility into the SaaS application? Because as Moinul had mentioned, right, there's a lot of items that go into thinking about what's the right piece for you to use. So when you really look at is understanding, right, is it a proxy issue? Is it not a proxy issue? And as you really look at those, being able to understand at that point in time, where do I need to go? What's the right tool for me to use? But how can I get more out of that tool is going to be really important. So as you look at that and try to secure that SaaS application, the first thing would be is to understand what's the long-term goal of that SaaS application, right? Or do you have a large need that is going to have additional items that you can view into, like I mentioned, identity and access management, third-party risk, governance control policies, as well as any type of compliance piece. So I would say that's going to be your biggest step when you're trying to secure those workloads, is to understand what the overall plan of attack is and what's the positive business outcome you're trying to reach, and put together that plan of attack. And it all starts really with assessing where you currently are and really seeing kind of what you need to do to cross that chasm to get those workloads into that sanction model there.
Very good. Thank you, Nick. And thanks, everyone, on the webinar today. That does conclude today's webinar. We hope you've thoroughly enjoyed the presentations, found it valuable, and know that you can reach out to Optiv and Palo Alto Networks at any time to help build out your cloud practices and secure them with a measure of confidence. A follow-up email will be sent to you shortly, which will include links to reviews today's webinar. And you can watch them on demand, review them again anytime you like. Please feel free to share those links, the link to the webinar, with any coworkers you have or anyone else you think could use assistance. Thanks again. We hope you have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.